Hey guys, welcome back. This is the story about what if Naruto went to Demon Slayer universe. Before we start, please subscribe to the channel and like the video as well, it really means a lot. So let's start the what if. Tamayo quickly gathered the supplies she would need, and Naruto watched her, an expert in her field, as she pulled on a pair of gloves and moved to his side. "How's Yuichiro?" Tamayo asked. She tied a rubber tourniquet around his arm, which in turn caused his veins to become more visible. "He hasn't visited in some time. He's been the same old Yuichiro, serious as usual," he answered, chuckling. "But he's also been working so hard, learning so much, and making friends outside of the clinic. I'm happy for him, honestly. It seems saving that young man did wonders for you as well," she remarked. Naruto tilted his head curiously. "You look so proud when you talk about him." "Oh, yeah," he said, a bit embarrassed. "Well, who wouldn't be proud of someone like him?" Disinfecting the area, Tamayo found the right vein and punctured it, drawing his blood through a special needle. The crimson liquid flowed freely, entering a vial. Despite this, Tamayo did not lose her composure, neither did she begin to salivate, like most other demons would. She drew several pints of blood, more so than a typical person. But thanks to Naruto's increased regenerative abilities, he could handle a bit more being taken. "Thank you, Naruto," Tamayo remarked happily. "Your blood sustains us for a longer period of time, compared to our other donors. It's always a pleasure to have you here." Naruto waved her off. "Come on, Tamayo. This is the least I can do for the person that saved my life." "I suppose," she laughed softly, then stored his blood in a secure place. She moved back and sat next to him. "Now, tell me about Susumaru. How has her behavior been?" Pulling his sleeve down, Naruto stroked his chin in thought. "She's been fine for the most part. Even around other people, she hasn't made a move to attack. She still desires blood though, and I gladly provide, of course. But, she's changed a bit. She remembers her life before she was turned. And she's working hard to improve herself, whether that's through gardening or reading or even playing with our cat." "Interesting," Tamayo said, mulling over his words. "I'm not too sure what to make of this. But I'm happy that even one demon could change their ways." "It has to be my blood," Naruto speculated. But Tamayo shook her head. "Possibly. However, I don't believe your blood physically changes people, not like Muzan's. What it does do, perhaps, is give demons the strength to change. In the case of many demons though, this change won't happen, because they would much rather the quick pleasure of eating you over working to restrain that part of themselves." "Huh," he remarked. "Never thought of it like that. It was an interesting hypothesis. Maybe his blood was a catalyst, not a cure, something that could aid demons in suppressing their urges for flesh and organs. But only if they truly desired to. If they did not want to change, then they wouldn't." "What about your plan to return home?" Tamayo inquired. "Have you made any progress?" Only 2 people knew about his project. Only Tamayo and Yuichiro. Naruto nodded, clenching and unclenching his fist. "I've made some progress, but I'm still not there yet. The solution could come to me today, or next year. That's how these things work. But no matter what, I will find a way back." "I know you will." Tamayo sighed, placing a gentle hand on his. "You just seem tired." "Is it that noticeable?" he asked. The sheer amount of chakra it took to expand the portal was finally taking its toll, it seemed. "A little," Tamayo said. "I know this is important to you, and I know that you're working very hard, but please don't hurt yourself in the process." She couldn't help but be concerned. This teenager, barely a man, had so much to deal with. "Don't worry, Tamayo. I'll be careful," he promised, smiling as he stood up. She could only nod and trust that he would be safe. "Before you leave," Tamayo said after a moment, "let me see Susumaru privately." I also want to take a sample of her blood. Susumaru found herself sitting across from Tamayo. They were alone, and it was silent. She didn't know what to think, what to say, or what to feel. Tamayo, however, smiled gently, a motherly look in her eyes. There was so much care and love in that gaze that Susumaru felt the tension around her begin to disappear. This must be strange for you, the older demon began. Your whole life has changed in a matter of days, and here you are, talking to another demon like yourself. I'd be lying if I said that's not how I feel, Susumaru admitted. But, a part me is relieved. Because I'm not alone. A blush tinted her pale cheeks. Yeah. Tamayo's kind gaze lingered on her. You'll never be alone, Susumaru. Not again. And if you need anything, you're welcome to come here anytime. The doctor stood up and began setting up her equipment. It's okay if I take your blood, right? Susumaru shrugged. Naruto already explained this would happen. Sure. With consent given, Tamayo went through the whole process once more. While she worked, Susumaru observed the beautiful woman, 1,000 thoughts in her mind. Can I ask you a question? Yes, dear. She ignored the pinch of the doctor's needle. How did you meet Naruto? Looking up, Tamayo said, it's quite the story. But to be brief, I found him outside my clinic. In the street, actually. He was terribly injured, unconscious, and surrounded by onlookers. While everyone was frozen, I did what any doctor would do. I took him in and helped him recover. Back then, his blood had been so alluring, so different from any person, that even her and Yashiro were affected. However, she did not act on that temptation to feast upon human flesh. Instead, she pulled herself together and focused on helping him, as a doctor would to any other patient. Nodding, Susumaru grew quiet once more. Then she glanced at the doctor again, hesitating. You have another question? Asked Tamayo. I don't know if it's too personal to ask. Tamayo concluded the procedure and stored Susumaru's blood. Don't worry. You can ask me anything. Susumaru swallowed. Then, your family, your human family, she began. When you were turned, did you kill them? Tamayo smiled sadly. Yes. Her husband and her children and so many other innocent people, dead by her hand. It was the one thing she could never forgive herself for doing. How did you move on from it, the guilt? Susumaru asked, her voice barely a whisper. I don't think I'll ever truly move past it, Tamayo explained. I still think about them, even to this day. But the guilt lessens with time, as horrible as it sounds. The thing is, you have to keep moving forward. Do something meaningful. Devote yourself to something that you know your family, were they still alive, would be proud of. Susumaru listened with rapt attention, engrossed in the wise woman's words. And most importantly, Tamayo continued, surround yourself with people that love you. And love them even more in return. It was time to leave. They'd spent a few hours in Tamayo's clinic, but it hadn't been for nothing. She'd learned so much, more than she deserved to know. For that, she was grateful. Grateful to have someone she could talk to about this new life she was living. Tamayo and Yashiro were there to see them off. The male demon had his arms crossed, standoffish as usual. But even he seemed to have enjoyed their visit. I appreciate your donation, Naruto, Tamayo said sincerely. It will sustain us for a good while. She glanced at Yashiro, who, taking the hint, bowed swiftly. Yes, Dr. Naruto. I appreciate your help as well. The blonde tousled Yashiro's hair as though he were a child, even if the demon was over 200 years older than him. I always knew you felt that way, Naruto teased, to Yashiro's annoyance. Tamayo then pulled Naruto into a tight, lingering hug. She did the same to Susumaru, holding her closely. Visit whenever you like, alright? Susumaru returned the embrace, tentatively at first, before wrapping her arms around the older demon. Sure, I will. And make sure to keep this knucklehead in check, she said, pining Naruto with a stern, yet affectionate gaze. Susumaru laughed lightly. Of course. Though, in actuality, it was the other way around. Without Naruto, who knew what she would be up to at this very moment? Probably listening to Yahaba complain endlessly about dirt and stains. Or worse, she would be on a mission given by Muzan himself. A spark of fear suddenly raced down her spine. With all that had occurred, Susumaru barely thought of that man. She'd been gone for a few days, not long enough to be a problem. But in time, her absence would become more apparent. Not to Muzan, maybe, but certainly to her former partner, Yahaba. She clenched her fists. If Yahaba tried anything to hurt Naruto, or even Yuichiro for that matter, she would beat him into a bloodly pulp and turn him into chunks of twitching flesh. For now, though, she would focus on what was important, her new life at the clinic, as well as the blonde walking by her side. They had just left Tamayo's clinic and were on the main road, walking at a reasonable pace, when a stray thought entered her mind. Hey, she began as they moved further down the path. I know this is a strange question to ask, but, are you leaving soon? Leaving? She held Jiraiya's book closer to her chest. Yeah. Yuichiro spoke about you returning to your home country or something. The blonde remained quiet for a time, even as they reached that part of town, the richer, more opulent part, filled with cars and fancily dressed individuals. Finally, he spoke. Yeah. I'll be returning home. As soon as I can. Okay. She whispered, clutching her book tighter. Where is it, your home? It's far, Naruto answered honestly. Far away from here. Like beyond the sea. Beyond that, he said, then sent her a small smile. Don't worry. When I leave, you can stay with Tamayo. She'll take good care of you. No. She felt her chest constrict, a sudden sadness coming upon her. But why? She'd only known him for a few days. Why was she feeling like this? Can't I come with you? She wanted to say, but Naruto's demeanor had changed. He suddenly paused, head snapping to the direction of Nerima. Something's wrong. In that moment, she felt it too. A wave of scents and sounds, and a pressure brimming with Muzan Kibutsuji's aura. She could sense it. 3 powerful entities ahead. And by the looks of things Naruto could perceive it too, a wave of negative emotions that flowed without end. Let's go, he said, breaking out into a sprint. She followed behind him, the world blurring out of focus as she attempted to keep up. In Caring Arms. It was chaos. People were screaming, hollering in fear. They were running away as a multitude of animals descended upon them. From mutated bears, to rabid wolves and dogs, to abnormally large birds, these creatures moved about as though controlled, pouncing indiscriminatingly at anything that moved. The streets were alight with a frenzied panic. Fathers attempting to protect their wives were attacked without remorse. Mothers, clutching their children, were mauled mercilessly. Police officers had yet to arrive at the scene, and it was a telltale sign of the spontaneity of this unprovoked attack. Mikado stood atop a building, a gleeful smile upon her lips. She watched the horror as it ensued, her horns sparking with stray bolts of electricity. She lifted her hands upward, and with this single gesture, she controlled the formation of the creatures attacking. Even without words, her animals still obeyed the command, finding new targets as people tried to run away. This was her blood demon art. She could turn any animal she pleased into a demon. Not only that, but she could manipulate them to a startling degree. She could also see through their eyes. And they were loyal to her, and only her. Next to her, Rokuro stood. Powerful arms crossed, he stroked his beard as he observed the carnage before them. It wasn't his style of killing by any means, but this sort of strategy did have its merits. You truly are ruthless, Mikado, he remarked with a low chuckle. She regarded him carefully. Is that a compliment? More like an observation, Lower Moon 2 replied. Well, I'm not doing this for my pleasure, not entirely, Mikago said quietly. With this, he's bound to appear. Gah! Lower Moon 6, Kaminu, growled. He was seated on the roof, watching the events unfold through narrowed eyes. He's just a fucking human. I don't see why we can't just search for him and capture him already. Quiet, Kaminu, Rokuro said sharply. Do not be so hasty. Trust in Mikago's judgment. If this human is really as troublesome as she claims, then we must follow her plan. We must be as meticulous as possible. Kaminu rolled his eyes, leaning forward. Then what about those two demon slayer brats? Can't I just kill them now? I'm feeling a bit hungry. Leave them, Rokuro intoned, uninterested. They're nothing but a nuisance. No longer listening to their discussion, Mikago's gaze landed on the demon slayers below. Just two of them, trying desperately to protect civilians. A male and female, battered and bruised and tired. She took note of the male, eyes lingering on him. He had a fine scent to him, a decent face, too. Perhaps, after capturing their main target, she would play with him for a bit. Still, it was quite entertaining to see them fighting her animals. It was a futile battle, though. Judging by the way they were struggling, they certainly weren't a threat. Slowly, she gazed upon her handiwork, the panic she had caused. And it was perfect, the best place to bring about death and destruction, the best way to lure him into their trap. Murata gritted his teeth. The bear was massive. Much larger than normal. And powerful. Its fur, instead of black, was a sickly gray. Its eyes burned a crimson shade, and engorged veins bulged along its body. It slobbered hungrily, fat globs of drool leaking from its gaping maw. It lunged toward him, growling dangerously. Water-breathing, first form. He took a breath and focused the oxygen in his lungs, letting it spread throughout his body. Water surface slash. His blade moved swiftly through the air, slicing into the neck of the creature before him. Even then, he could barely pierce its flesh. The bear swiped with menacing claws, which cut through Murata's uniform and lacerated his side. He hissed, applying more force to his swing. And finally, the bear's head was separated from its body, spraying warm blood into the air. It collapsed with a thud, sputtering, and twitching as the last vestiges of life slipped away. Murata panted heavily, his grip on the katana loosening. He clutched at his side and felt the warmth of blood on his hand, flowing steadily. Damn it! He muttered. The family behind him looked on, reaching out to help him, but he shook his head. Go! Now! While there's still a chance. They obeyed his order and scrambled to their feet. A mother grabbed her child and fled, just as three mutated birds came careening his way. They were large, almost as big as a person, beating their heavy wings against the air. Murata ignored the pain and lifted his blade, entering another stance. Sixth form, Whirlpool. Twisting his body, he generated enough force to slice through two of the birds. But one evaded his spinning attack, piercing his shoulder with its powerful beak. Murata cried out and quickly cut off its head. He stumbled, staggering backward as the creature disappeared upon dying. His breathing became harsher, his body trembling with exhaustion. If only he was as strong as Ju. Then maybe he would be able to stand a chance. But things were looking more hopeless as time went on. He chanced a glimpse at that building, catching sight of those three demons. The 12 Kazuki, without a doubt. He shivered with apprehension. They were watching him. He could just feel it, their numbered eyes gazing at him as though he were nothing but an ant. This was the worst possible outcome. Their mission, meant to be a simple one, had turned out to be well beyond their skill level. Ozaki, he thought desperately. Where was she? He'd lost her in the panicking crowd. Scanning his surroundings, he found her engaged in combat with 2 demon bears, her uniform ruffled and torn. Despite the pain in his side and shoulder, he sprinted forward. He brought his sword down, cutting off a paw that was about to tear into his partner. She turned, relief in her eyes as she saw him. "Murata!" Ozaki exclaimed. She looked just as bad as him, if not worse. There was a large cut on her forehead, which leaked blood into her eye, obscuring her vision. Back to back, they stood together as more creatures began to encircle them. Most of the crowd had fled, and the animals were now converging on their location, growling and snapping hungrily. Clutching his side, Murata said, "Looks like a lot people escaped." Ozaki panted breathlessly. "That's good. I'm glad we could do something to help. This sucks," he said, stabbing a disfigured dog through the throat. She could feel tears brimming in her eyes, but she shook her head. "I thought I'd live a little long than this." "I thought so too," Murata's voice trembled, and he wheezed as a sharp pain stabbed at his side. "At least I had good partner to fight alongside me." Ozaki smiled a bit, blinking away the blood that entered her eye. A dog suddenly lunged toward Murata's blind spot, and she leapt forward, pushing him aside as it bit into her forearm, sharp teeth digging into her flesh. She screamed out, sheer agony shooting through her. "Ozaki!" It was Murata's voice. He cried in alarm as a bear came barreling toward her, intent on tearing her apart. If she said she wasn't afraid of dying, she would be lying. But in that moment, despite the terror coursing through her veins, she felt as though she could perceive everything in slow motion. And she watched with fascination as the dog's head, the one biting her, exploded into pieces, spraying her with warm blood. It didn't stop there, however, because the bear had also been reduced to chunks of meat. She could barely track it, but a patterned ball, a tamari, was the culprit. It impacted her foe with enough force to tear its flesh apart. Next to her, Murata was no longer in danger, for the animals attacking him were on the ground, cut to pieces by a familiar blonde doctor. Naruto stood protectively in front of them. Susumaru was at his side, bouncing her tamari balls upon the road. "Naruto," Murata said, clutching his side. "Long time no see," the blonde replied, brandishing a glowing kunai. He surveyed the area with a frown, eyes snapping to the 3 demons on the roof. "They did this, huh?" "Yeah." Naruto turned and faced them, unflinching as he studied the beings above him. His eyes narrowed. "That's all I need to know." The moment he arrived, they could feel it. An overwhelming urge to devour. Mikado shivered, tremors tingling up and down her spine. Just being in his proximity was enough to set her body ablaze. Atop their perch, she stared downward, enthralled by that glare he was giving her. She met his gaze with wide, excited eyes. There was such anger, such fury, contained within those sea blue orbs that she could hardly keep still. But his was a calm, controlled anger. One possessed by those who knew and breathed combat. Even now, she could tell he was analyzing them, sifting through possible strategies with every passing second. This wouldn't be easy. Not without their help, at least. Mikado knew this, but she wasn't so sure that her fellow demons felt the same. To them, he was just a human. Weak. Limited. Not even a demon slayer. However, she'd seen what he could do. She'd seen his skill. His brutality. His efficiency. He was a warrior, through and through, and she would not underestimate him, despite her pride as a demon telling her to. Kaminu was shaking next to her. He was panting and drooling and sweating. His physical reaction was far more apparent than hers. He sniffed the air long and hard, breathing in the scent of their golden-haired target. He could hardly control himself, could hardly keep his claws and fangs from lengthening. The roof began to harden around him, transmuted into a dense, crystal-like substance. His blood demon art. A simple, yet practical ability. Incredible, Rokuro finally said. He too had succumbed to the blonde man's presence. His eyes were wide, and strands of saliva leaked from each corner of this mouth. Him. How embarrassing. He wiped the drool away, shocked that a single human could elicit such a response from him. No one, not even those with Marichi blood, ever had him trembling and shivering with bloodlust. He turned to the smaller demon by his side, scrutinizing her with a long, sharp gaze. I must admit, Mikago. I wasn't entirely convinced of what you told us. I merely thought you were exaggerating things. But this is even better than I imagined. What a unique specimen you found. This blood, this flesh, it's calling out to me. And I must have it. I told you, didn't I? Her voice was soft, laced with a twinge of smugness. I have watched him for some time now, using only small rodents and insects. Animals that would arouse little suspicion. At first, I wanted to take him myself, but after seeing so many demons fall by his hand, left in the sun to die, I considered a different, more efficient approach to his capture. One involving both of you. Well, you certainly made a wise decision by not keeping this to yourself, Mikago. A threat, she realized. Rokuro then stroked his obsidian beard, locking eyes with the blonde once more. However, I do wonder. What is so different about this person? Why have I never encountered a human like this before? I don't know. Mikago leveled her fellow demon with a stare. His previous threat hadn't left her mind. But I believe that he is the key to increasing our strength. It was a simple concept, really. The more humans you devoured, the stronger you became. And if you devoured humans with special blood, you became that much more powerful. Another way to gain strength was to be given large amounts of Muzan's blood. But that in itself was a difficult thing to attain, and if a demon could not handle such high amounts of his blood, death and pain were certain. For years, they'd toiled, they'd consumed humans, fought demon slayers, competed with the upper moons, all while following every one of Master Muzan's orders. Yet, nothing ever changed. Unlike them, the upper ranks had not lost a single member for over a century. The lower ranks, however, seemed to be replaced with every passing decade. Mikago had clawed her way up for years and years, killing and killing and killing. All with the hope of gaining enough strength to secure her life, her future. Forever. And she'd thought that once she became a member of the 12 that she would have enough power to survive indefinitely. Oh! How wrong she was. As a lower moon, she was still far from the strongest. She was still far from that pinnacle of strength that would prolong her life for many more years. The upper moons were different, even compared to the lower. They were anomalies that transcended the strength of normal demons. No matter how many humans she'd consumed, her power never grew to the extent of the upper 6. And now, Mikago could sense it. Muzan's anger toward them. His displeasure at their failures. It was growing. And soon, his patience would run out. That is, if they weren't killed by a Hashira before that. Those damned demon slayers. She'd almost died fighting one of them. A woman with pink hair and warm, green eyes. With few choices left, she needed a way to survive. To grow stronger. And this human was the key. She just knew it. Survive, Mikago. A voice rang in her head, whispered from a past she no longer remembered. There was a feral growl rising from the throat of Kaminu. Mikago was pulled from her thoughts, and she glanced his way. He went on all fours, veins covering his entire body. He twitched and spasmed with desire. I'm done waiting around, he howled. He's mine. Stay out of it. Fine. Rokuro shook his head. Try not to harm him too much. Mikago said nothing. This was the plan, after all. A test run. A way to see just how well he would fare against the weakest of the lower moons. If her observations were correct, then she and Rokuro would need to get involved. If not, then this would be over in seconds, providing them with a meal unlike any other. The crystal-like substance erupted next to Kaminu, forming into a spear. He grinned hungrily as his gaze settled on the man below them. He grabbed his newly made weapon, twirling it with impressive expertise. Mikage directed her animals to encircle their foes, ensuring a tactical advantage. Just as Kaminu made his move, Mikage finally took notice of the orange-haired woman standing beside their target. Her eyes grew wide, horns sparking with intrigue. A demon? Naruto gazed up at all three of them, eyes narrowing to slits. He studied them carefully, taking in the appearance of each demon. He considered the way they stood, their postures, their expressions, painstakingly considering what actions to take against them. He was no coward, mind you. Naruto was fully confident in his abilities, but he would not be arrogant. Every threat had to be taken seriously, lest he falter and fall prey to the unknown capabilities of these beings. Demons were powerful, no doubt, but compared to the people he had faced back home, they barely scratched the surface of what was considered extremely dangerous in the elemental nations. At least, the average demon. The real danger, however, came with the blood demon art, a variety of abilities that, if utilized properly, could take objectively stronger opponents by surprise. So he had to be on guard. Especially now, considering the fact that a massive amount of his and Kurama's chakra was being diverted to his clones in order to keep the portal home expanding. Right now, by a rough estimate, he had less than 10% of his chakra available for combat. If he wanted to use more, he would risk losing months of progress. Because if he diverted the energy he was feeding into the portal, it would begin to close, a frustrating outcome for all his hard work. Not only was this a factor, but these three demons in particular seemed much more powerful than the ones that usually attacked him. I wonder. The 12 Kazuki, Susumaru suddenly said. She shivered with apprehension, a worried look painting her features. Is that so? Naruto crossed his arms, suspicions confirmed. I thought something felt different about them. The amount of negative emotions was palpable, mingling with the air around them. He took a step forward, putting himself between the demons and the three people behind him. Ozaki quickly stood up, clutching her injured arm. You're not going to fight them, are you? The concern in her voice was evident, so much so that his features softened. I am, Ozaki, he said gently. I have to. You can't, urged Murata. He too found his footing, the cut on his side bleeding. This is our job. We won't allow you to get hurt for our sake, for our failure. Naruto turned to them, still keeping an eye on the three demons above. It appeared as though they were conversing among themselves. Planning their next move, no doubt. I understand where you're coming from, Murata. But you're in no shape to fight. Plus, you've done more than enough. Both of you have. You protected so many people, and it's okay to rest for now. Ozaki gritted her teeth. But... Hey! Murata had moved to her side, placing a hand on her shoulder. In those moments, he accepted the situation, slumping with defeat. I think we should just let it go. It's not like we can stop him, anyway. Ozaki deflated, sadness in her gaze. But she didn't protest, calmed by Murata's gentle touch. Thanks, Murata, Naruto said. He pulled out 2 kunai from a holster. No matter what happens to me, I want both of you to get to safety. His chakra flared to life, filling the air with an energy foreign to this world. Behind him, all 3 of his companions froze. Ozaki's eyes were wide. Murata's legs quivered. And a chill ran down Susumaru's spine. To them, it felt strange. Like tiny needles prickling against their skin. Like the sensation of snow against exposed flesh. It was subtle, but also bold. Alive, but lacking sapience. This energy flowed from the core of Naruto's being, bringing with it a wave of feelings they could not describe. An otherworldly feeling. Susumaru, Naruto said. His voice pulled her from her trance. protect Ozaki and Murata. No matter what. She nodded firmly, taking a defensive stance in front of the two injured slayers. By now, the demon bears, dogs, and birds not beheaded by a Nichiren blade began to rise, their wounds healing after an extended period of time. I wish I could give you my sword, said Ozaki. But mine's chipped so badly it's basically unusable. Murata frowned, inspecting his blade. Damn. So is mine. Naruto grinned. No worries, you too. I have my own ways of dealing with demons. 1. Injure them continuously until sunrise came. 2. Immobilize them, then leave them in the sun. Or option 3, use a Raisin Shuriken, destroying every cell in their body, rendering them unable to regenerate. Perhaps not the most efficient way of handling it, but it was his way of doing so. But of course, option 3 wasn't something he wanted to attempt, especially around such a populated area. Even so, his Raisin Shuriken theory was an untested one. Because he didn't know how far a demon's regeneration went. Was it strictly cellular or something entirely different? Still, Susumaru remained worried for his sake. That apprehensive look hadn't left her features since this ordeal began. Naruto was strong. She knew this. But against 3 of the 12? Surely, even he would struggle. Should they retreat? She didn't know. Susumaru glanced upward. Her eyes narrowed to slits. The 3 lower ranks had yet to leave their perch. Instead, they were all staring at them, clearly focused on one person. Naruto. Everything clicked in that moment. These attacks. The hungry looks in their eyes. They were after Naruto, of course. They were after his flesh and blood. Just like that day when she'd first met him, intent on eating him. A cold sweat fell down her brow, and a feeling of guilt washed over her. Because she'd been like them, so full of hunger for human flesh that she would do whatever it took to get it. Before she could voice her concern, Naruto asked, "Do you know their abilities?" "I don't. I've never even met them." Susumaru frowned deeply, disappointed that she couldn't be of help. "And some of these members seem new," she whispered. "Sorry." Naruto nudged her gently, smiling. "It's all right. I just have to be a bit more careful, then." Above, something was forming in the hands of one of the demons. It was a crystal-like substance, transformed into a spear. The demon grabbed it, stepping forward. 5 more spears formed above him, floating. Kamina stretched out his hands, and all 3 spears shot forward, breaking the sound barrier as they raced toward them. Naruto grimaced, eyes tracking the projectiles careening through the air. A pulse of chakra flooded his body. The ground shattered beneath his feet. Naruto moved in a blur speed, tearing forward like a rocket. He flew through a series of hand signs, molding chakra for his first technique. Air bullet. He exhaled a compressed gust of wind that threw all 5 crystal spears off their trajectory. Then, Kamina met him on the street below. Naruto weaved past a mighty swing, tossing a wind-imbued kunai through the demon's neck. It was like a knife through butter. Blood splat from the sudden wound, a gaping hole left in his throat. Shock gripped the demon, eyes widening, even as his injury began to heal. Naruto advanced forward, a heavy fist careening into the demon's skull. A notable crack echoed around them as his temple was broken to pieces. Kamina growled, teeth gritting in rage and pain. The 5 spears from earlier returned, controlled by his will. They soared through the air, whizzing about as they flew toward Naruto like heating-seeking missiles. He dodged every spear that came his way, undeterred by the demon's predictable attacks. He'd end this, now. In that moment, a sphere came to life above his palm. It glowed in the darkened city street, spinning and spinning as it grew. This one was larger than normal, but not to the extent of an Otama Rasengan. Still, it would deal great damage if landed properly. Kamina looked on, surprised yet fascinated. Obviously, he had never seen a human produce something quiet like this. So, Naruto took this opportunity. With that instance of hesitation, he shot forward. He appeared before the shocked demon, thrusting the Rasengan into his chest. A shockwave exploded around them, cracking nearby windows and street lamps. Kamina's mouth opened in a horrified scream, features contorting with agony. The Rasengan drilled and drilled, tearing his flesh apart, shattering his ribs, and turning his torso into mangled flesh. Another shockwave expanded outward, launching the howling demon into an empty building. He broke through its walls. Wood splintered and cracked beneath the force of the Rasengan. The building groaned, then collapsed in on itself. A cloud of dust filled the street, and Kamina's screams finally died down until no sound was left. There was silence. Utter silence. Both from the three behind him and the demons still observing from above. Naruto then glared upward, almost as if to say, "You're next." "That fool," Rokuro hissed. He was far too overconfident. Mikage tilted her head, and she halted her animal's advancement. What just happened? Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you enjoyed this what if and want to see next part of it, comment down below and let me know. Also share this video with your friends. See you in the next video. Peace.